for 6 days. The Alpha King's hound did not move. Not during the freezing nights when winter winds screamed through the mountain fortress. Not when servants carried fresh torches into the underground corridors with trembling hands. Not even when the Alpha King himself descended beneath the castle and ordered the beast away in a voice that once commanded entire armies. The hound remained there, motionless, watching the iron prison door at the end of the corridor, like something inside it mattered more than the throne above, and that terrified the kingdom, because everyone feared the Alpha King's hound. Children in distant villages grew up hearing stories about it. Soldiers whispered about the creature beside campfires during wartime. Rebels surrendered the moment they saw its enormous black shape standing beside royal banners on the battlefield. The beast was not merely an animal, it was a symbol of punishment, of loyalty, of death. For nearly 15 years it had followed King Kale through bloodshed and rebellion without hesitation. It obeyed no command except his, trusted no hand except his. When executions took place inside the capital square, the hound always sat beside the throne platform with silent amber eyes fixed on the condemned. It never barked, never growled, never needed to. Its presence alone was enough. But now that same creature sat outside the underground prison chambers, refusing food, refusing orders, refusing sleep. Because of a girl nobody inside the fortress truly understood. The rumors began on the second night. By the fourth, the entire palace whispered about her. And by the 6th day, fear spread faster than winter fire through dry wood. Some believed she was cursed. Others claimed she carried the blood of an ancient wolf line thought extinct generations ago. A few servants swore they heard the hound whimper softly outside her cell during the darkest hours before dawn, as though mourning something long dead. Nobody knew the truth, not even the guards. Assigned to the underground corridor, they only knew the prisoner had arrived after midnight beneath heavy snowstorms. Royal soldiers escorted her through hidden fortress entrances while the king personally watched from horseback. No public announcement followed, no formal charges, no execution date, only silence and silence inside. The royal fortress was always more frightening than violence. Deep underground, behind thick iron bars dampened by cold mountain air. The girl sat awake against the stone wall of her prison cell. Her wrists ached from old restraints, dark bruises wrapped around pale skin like fading shadows. Every movement reminded her of the long journey north through snow-covered forests and frozen roads, where royal guards spoke about her in hushed voices, believing she could not hear them. The prisoner, the hidden one, the girl the king wanted buried. Even now, she still did not fully understand why she had been taken. Her name was Lyra, at least she thought it still was. The name felt strange now, distant somehow, like something belonging to another life. She closed her eyes briefly and leaned her head against the cold wall behind her, listening carefully to the underground silence. Dripping water echoed somewhere deeper within the prison chambers. Chains rattled faintly in distant corridors abandoned years ago. And beyond the iron door outside her cell came the slow, steady breathing of the beast. The sound unsettled her more than screaming would have. At first, she believed the hound waited there to ensure she never escaped. That assumption made sense. Monsters belonged beside kings like Kale. Loyalty built through fear always required creatures capable of violence. But 6 days had passed. 6 endless days, and the beast had not harmed her once. That frightened her in ways she could not explain. Because protection was unfamiliar. Protection meant value, and nothing in her life had ever suggested she possessed. A sudden burst of shouting echoed faintly from above. Lyra opened her eyes. More voices followed, nervous, tense. She slowly stood from the corner of the cell and stepped toward the iron bars. The corridor beyond flickered with weak torchlight. Shadows stretched along damp stone walls, while the massive black hound rested near the entrance of her prison. Its size still shocked her, even lying down. The creature looked enormous enough to tear through armored men. Thick, dark fur covered powerful muscles scarred by countless battles. One ear bore an old, jagged tear. Pale silver scars crossed its broad shoulders beneath the torchlight. A war beast, a killer. Yet now it simply rested there, with its head lowered between giant paws, watching her. The moment she moved closer, its ears twitched slightly. Lyra froze. The hound slowly lifted its head. Amber eyes locked onto hers instantly. A strange feeling tightened painfully inside her chest. Not fear. Something older, something buried deep beneath memory. The creature stared at her with an intensity that made the underground corridor feel suddenly smaller. It was not the look of a predator studying prey. It looked like recognition, as though the beast already knew her. Impossible. Lyra swallowed hard and gripped the cold bars tighter. The hound stood slowly. Torchlight rolled across its black fur while heavy paws crossed the stone floor toward her cell. Every instinct inside her screamed to step backward, yet strangely, she could not move. The beast stopped inches from the bars. Close enough now that she could hear its breathing clearly. Close enough to see intelligence burning behind those amber eyes. And then something impossible happened. The hound lowered its head. Submission. Lyra's breath caught sharply in her throat. No creature serving the Alpha King bowed to prisoners, especially not this one. The silence between them stretched painfully long. Then footsteps echoed from the staircase leading underground. The hound immediately turned. Its body stiffened. Several guards appeared first, carrying torches and wearing nervous expressions. They descended cautiously into the corridor, while avoiding direct eye contact with the beast. Then the Alpha King himself emerged behind them. King Kale filled the underground passage with the same quiet authority he carried everywhere. Tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in dark winter furs lined with silver. He moved with controlled stillness that made even armored soldiers step aside instinctively. But tonight, something about him looked different. Tired, not physically weak, never weak. Yet, exhaustion lingered heavily beneath his eyes, like a man who had not truly slept in days. The moment Kale entered the corridor, the guards straightened immediately. The hound did not. King Kale's sharp gaze settled. First upon the beast, then slowly shifted toward Lyra standing behind the bars. A strange expression crossed his face for half a second. Not anger, not hatred, fear, real fear. Lyra felt cold unease crawl beneath her skin. Because powerful men only feared dangerous truths, and somehow she had become one. Kale stepped forward. "Leave us," he ordered quietly. The guards hesitated only briefly before retreating toward the stairwell. None seemed eager to remain near the corridor anyway. Soon only the king, the hound, and the prisoner remained underground together. Silence swallowed the space between them. Kale stared at the beast. "Move." The command echoed sharply through the corridor. The hound remained still. Lyra blinked in disbelief. Nobody disobeyed the Alpha King. Nobody. Kyle's jaw tightened slightly. Move away from the cell. Still nothing. For the first time since her capture, Lyra saw uncertainty flicker openly across the king's face. The underground torches crackled softly, while tension thickened the air itself. Then slowly, Kale walked closer toward the bars. The hound growled. The sound rolled through the corridor like distant thunder. Low, dangerous, A. Warning. Lyra's pulse stumbled violently inside her chest. Because the beast was not threatening her. It was threatening the king. Kale stopped instantly. The growl deepened, every muscle inside the Hound's massive body tightened as it positioned itself directly between Kale and the prison cell, protecting her. The realization struck Lyra so suddenly she almost stepped backward. Why would the Alpha King's own beast protect a prisoner? Kale looked down at the Hound with something dangerously close to grief burning behind his eyes. "You remember?" he whispered. The words barely reached her ears, but they changed everything. "Remember what?" The king slowly lifted his gaze toward Lyra again. For several long seconds, neither spoke. She felt strangely unable to look away from him, because beneath the authority, beneath the crown, beneath the cold control, this man looked haunted. And somehow she knew the reason had something to do with her. "You should not be here," Kale finally said quietly. Lyra frowned. "I don't even know why I am here." The king's expression darkened painfully. "That is precisely the problem." Before she could respond, Kale turned away abruptly. The Hound watched him carefully but did not move from the prison door. Heavy footsteps echoed across stone while the Alpha King disappeared back toward the staircase leading above ground. Yet just before vanishing from sight completely, he stopped. Without turning around, he spoke one final sentence. "No one enters this corridor without my permission." Then he left. The silence afterward felt enormous. Lyra stared after him in confusion, while questions twisted endlessly through her mind. What did he mean? Why had the Hound reacted that way? And why had fear appeared in the king's eyes the moment he looked at her? Outside the cell, the beast slowly lowered itself back onto the stone floor. Still guarding, still watching, still refusing to leave. Hours passed somewhere far above. Bells rang softly across the fortress, signaling midnight. Lyra remained awake. Sleep felt impossible now. Every answer only created larger questions. She paced slowly inside the small prison chamber, arms wrapped tightly around herself against the cold. Her thoughts drifted repeatedly toward broken fragments of memory. She could never fully grasp snow falling. Beneath red flames, a woman screaming her name. The smell of smoke choking the air. Then, darkness, always darkness afterward. Pain stabbed suddenly through her temples. Lyra winced and pressed trembling fingers against her head. The memories vanished again. Before she could reach them, frustration burned inside her chest. Who was she really? Why did the king fear her existence? And why did the Hound look at her like someone returned from the dead? Soft footsteps interrupted her thoughts. An elderly servant carefully descended into the corridor, carrying a wooden bowl of water, unlike the guards. She did not seem entirely afraid of the beast, though. Caution remained visible in every movement. The old woman placed the bowl several feet away from the Hound and bowed her head slightly. "Please, eat," she whispered softly. The beast ignored the water completely. Its eyes remained fixed on Lyra's cell. The servant looked toward the prisoner. Then, only briefly, but sorrow flickered across her face so suddenly that Lyra noticed immediately. "You know me," Lyra said quietly. The woman stiffened. For a moment it seemed she might deny it. Instead, she lowered her gaze. "I know what the palace fears." Before Lyra could ask another question, the servant quickly retreated toward the stairs. The Hound never moved. The corridor fell silent again, but now dread curled deep inside Lyra's stomach, because everyone here acted like they recognized something she did not. And whatever truth connected her to this fortress had existed long before her capture. Outside, winter storms battered the mountain kingdom throughout the night. Inside the royal fortress, rumors spread from servant quarters to noble chambers with unstoppable speed. The Alpha King's hound had abandoned the throne. For 6 days it had guarded a forgotten prisoner beneath the castle, and somewhere inside, the darkness below. The girl inside the cell slowly began understanding one terrifying truth. She had not been brought here to disappear. She had been brought here because the king was afraid of her, and fear, she would soon learn, could destroy kingdoms far faster than war ever could by the 7th day. Fear had settled over the royal fortress like winter frost. It crept through servant corridors, lingered beneath grand archways, slipped quietly into banquet halls where nobles pretended not to notice the tension tightening. Around the throne, nobody spoke openly about the prisoner beneath the castle. But everyone thought about her, because the Alpha King's hound still refused to leave the underground corridor, and every hour the beast remained there made the silence surrounding the girl more dangerous. Snow fell endlessly beyond the fortress walls that morning, covering the mountains in pale gray light. From the highest towers, the kingdom looked peaceful beneath winter skies. But inside the palace, peace had already begun to rot, servants whispered, while pouring wine. Royal guards avoided eye contact whenever the lower prison chambers were mentioned. Even the musicians playing during the winter court feast seemed uneasy, their melodies quieter than usual, strained beneath the weight of invisible fear. At the center of the great hall sat King Kale upon the black throne of the northern kingdom. Cold firelight danced across silver armor resting beside him. Nobles filled the long tables below, while banners shifted gently overhead beneath currents of warm air rising from enormous hearths. Normally Kale commanded every room. Effortlessly, tonight his attention drifted constantly toward the doors, toward the underground staircases hidden beyond stone corridors, toward the truth waiting beneath his own fortress. An advisor leaned close beside the throne. The rumors are spreading faster than expected. Kale did not answer immediately. Below the throne platform, nobles drank heavily while pretending not to stare at him. Fear lingered inside the hall like smoke. Finally, the king spoke quietly, then silenced them. The advisor hesitated. With respect, Your Majesty, people are frightened. The guards talk. The servants listen. Everyone knows the hound has abandoned its post. A dangerous stillness entered Kale's expression. The hound has not abandoned anything. Yet, even as he said the words, doubt hollowed something inside him, because deep down, he knew exactly why the beast refused to leave the prison corridor, and that knowledge had begun poisoning every thought he possessed far below the feast hall. Lyra sat awake inside her cell, listening to distant echoes of celebration. Above the contrast felt cruel. Music and laughter existed somewhere overhead while cold darkness swallowed everything beneath the fortress. She wrapped the thin blanket tighter around herself and stared toward the corridor entrance where the hound rested. Beneath flickering torchlight, still there, always there, the beast had not slept properly once since her arrival. Guards occasionally attempted to lure it away with raw meat or commands from royal handlers. But nothing worked. The creature ignored everyone, except her. That terrified the palace more than violence ever could. Lyra slowly approached the bars. Again, the hound immediately lifted its head. Its amber eyes softened slightly the moment they found her. That strange ache returned inside her chest. Recognition. The feeling refused to leave her alone now. You know me? She whispered. Quietly, the beast said nothing. Of course, yet somehow its silence felt heavier than words. Outside the corridor, footsteps echoed faintly. 2 guards approached carrying fresh torches while speaking in hushed voices. She survived another night. She Won't survive many more. Do you think the king? Plans to execute her. I think the king is terrified. The second sentence sent unease through Lyra instantly. Terrified of what? The guards noticed her standing near the bars, and immediately lowered their voices further, but not before she caught another phrase. The Northern Massacre. Her pulse stumbled. The words struck something buried deep. Inside her memory, a sudden flash tore through her mind. Snow covered in blood, burning rooftops collapsing beneath smoke. A woman, screaming while carrying a child through darkness. Pain exploded across Lyra's temples so violently she staggered. Backward the guards jumped in alarm. The Hound rose. Instantly, low growls rolled through the corridor. As the beast pressed itself near the cell door, watching her carefully, Lyra gripped the wall beside her while breathing shakily. The memory vanished before she could fully grasp it again, always disappearing. Before answers came, one guard muttered nervously, "There's something wrong with her." "No," the other whispered. "There's something wrong with this entire place." Neither remained long afterward. The moment they left, silence reclaimed the underground chambers. Lyra slowly sank onto the edge of the narrow prison bed. Heart still racing painfully, Northern Massacre. The words echoed endlessly through her thoughts. Why did they feel familiar? Why did every memory inside her mind end with fire? And why did the Alpha King look at her like a man staring at his own nightmare? Above ground, Kale stood alone inside the royal study hours later while storms battered the fortress windows. The room smelled faintly of parchment and smoke. Maps covered long wooden tables. War banners hung motionless beside ancient stone walls lined with shelves of forgotten records. The king had not touched the documents before him in nearly an hour. Instead, he stared into the fireplace while memory slowly consumed him 20 years earlier. Another winter, another storm. He remembered riding north beside armed soldiers through endless snowfall, while fear twisted violently through the kingdom. Civil war had been close. Then too close. Several noble bloodlines still carried stronger claims to the throne than his own. If rebellion erupted, the realm would split apart before spring arrived. So Kale made a choice. One village, one bloodline. One terrible night. Necessary sacrifices. That was how he justified it afterward. Necessary, but memory had grown cruel with age, because he still remembered the screams, still remembered smoke swallowing the sky, and worst of all, he remembered the child they never found. Afterward, a knock interrupted his thoughts. Kale turned. Sharply, the captain of the royal guard entered the chamber looking uneasy. "Your Majesty?" "What is it?" The prisoner. Kale's expression hardened instantly. "What about her?" The Hound attacked another handler. Silence, then slowly, dangerously, the king stepped away from the fireplace. Injuries? Broken arm. Deep bite wounds. Kale closed his eyes briefly. Of course, the beast was growing more aggressive because it sensed danger closing around her, and somewhere deep inside himself. Kale understood why the captain hesitated before speaking again. There are also rumors spreading through the lower city. What rumors? The man swallowed carefully. That the prisoner may be connected to the northern bloodlines. Kale's gaze turned deadly cold. Who started it? We don't know, but Kale already suspected the answer. Fear itself. Fear spread stories faster than spies ever could. The king walked toward the window overlooking the snow-covered capital below. Thousands of lights flickered through the city streets beneath heavy snowfall. His kingdom, the realm he had spent decades protecting, building, controlling, and now everything threatened to fracture. Because of one girl locked beneath the fortress, one survivor, Kale, spoke quietly without turning around. No one speaks to the prisoner. Yes, Your Majesty. No one enters the underground corridor without my permission. The captain bowed immediately, and the Hound. Kale's silence lasted too long. Finally, he answered, "Leave it alone." The captain looked startled, but obeyed without question. After the man departed, Kale remained staring into the storm outside. His reflection shimmered faintly against the dark glass. Older. Now, tired, haunted, because the truth he buried 20 years earlier had finally returned, wearing the face of a frightened girl beneath his prison, and the beast he trusted most had recognized her before he did. Deep underground, night settled heavily over the prison chambers. Most torches had burned low by now, leaving long shadows stretching across damp stone walls. Lyra sat awake near the bars again while exhaustion pulled at her body. Still, sleep refused to come. Every sound made her tense. Every whisper from passing guards sharpened her. Fear further. The Hound remained lying outside her cell with its massive body partially blocking the corridor entrance. Watching, always watching at some point after midnight. Soft footsteps approached once more. Not guards this time. The elderly servant from before emerged carrying folded blankets and a lantern. The Hound lifted its head, but did not growl. The woman carefully knelt beside the cell. "You're freezing," she whispered softly. Lyra hesitated before accepting the blankets through the bars. "Why are you helping me?" The servant looked toward the beast briefly, then back at her, because someone should have helped long ago. Confusion tightened inside Lyra's chest. "You know who I am?" The woman's eyes filled briefly with sorrow. "I know enough. Then tell me." Silence. The old servant trembled slightly while glancing nervously toward the corridor stairs as though terrified someone might hear. Finally, she leaned closer. There was once a northern house loved by the people more than the throne itself. Lyra's pulse quickened instantly. Their bloodline frightened powerful men. Another fragment struck her memory suddenly. A silver wolf crest hanging above burning doors. A Luma kneeling before her beside candlelight. Soft hands brushing snow from a child's hair. Then screaming. Lyra gasped softly. The servant's expression darkened with grief. "You remember pieces now, don't you? What happened to them?" The woman looked down. They were erased. The words hollowed the air itself. "How?" The servant opened her mouth, then froze. The Hound rose instantly beside them. Low growls vibrated through the corridor. Someone else was approaching fast. The elderly servant immediately backed away from the cell in panic. A hooded figure appeared at the far end of the underground hallway moments later. Not a guard. The person moved carefully through darkness, glancing repeatedly over their shoulder before continuing forward. Lyra felt unease crawl through her stomach. The Hound's growl deepened. The hooded stranger stopped outside the prison corridor entrance. Slowly, deliberately. They pulled a dagger from beneath dark robes. The servant gasped quietly. Lyra stumbled backward from the bars. The figure moved toward the cell, fast. The Hound attacked instantly. The roar that exploded through the underground chambers shook dust from the ceiling itself. The assassin barely raised the dagger before the beast slammed into them with terrifying force. Metal crashed loudly across stone floors. The hooded figure screamed as enormous jaws locked around their arm. Blood splattered against the corridor wall. Chaos erupted. The attacker tried desperately to crawl backward, but the Hound dragged them violently across the ground with horrifying strength. Guards shouted somewhere above. Footsteps thundered toward the prison stairs. Lyra stood frozen inside the cell, while terror crashed through her chest. The beast positioned itself directly between her and the attacker again, protecting her. Not guarding. Protecting. Protecting. The realization shattered something deep inside her. Why? Why would this creature risk everything for her? The assassin reached desperately toward the fallen dagger. The hound snarled viciously, inches from their throat. The person froze instantly. A moment later, guards flooded the corridor, carrying torches and swords. Everyone stopped dead at the sight before them. Blood. The wounded attacker pinned beneath the Alpha King's Hound, and the prisoner standing unharmed behind iron bars. One guard whispered shakily, "Gods." Another looked genuinely terrified, because now the truth had become impossible to deny. Someone inside the palace wanted the girl dead, badly enough to risk entering the underground corridor, and the king's own beast had stopped them. The guards dragged the injured assassin away moments later, while fear spread visibly across every face. Nobody questioned Lyra. Nobody spoke to her. They only stared, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. When silence finally returned, the hound slowly settled outside the cell once more, breathing heavily, blood-stained parts of its dark fur. Lyra approached the bars carefully. The beast lifted its head for several seconds. They simply looked at one another beneath flickering torchlight. Then slowly, trembling slightly, Lyra lowered her hand toward the narrow gap between iron bars. The hound stared at her quietly and gently pressed its massive head against her. Fingers, warm, steady, trusting. Tears burned suddenly behind Lyra's eyes before she understood. Why? Because she could not remember the last time anything in this world touched her without violence. By the 8th morning, the kingdom no longer whispered. It watched. From the frozen streets beneath the mountain fortress to the crowded merchant districts lining the lower capital, one story consumed every conversation. The Alpha King's Hound had chosen a prisoner over its master. And somewhere beneath the royal castle, a girl hidden from the world had become important enough to kill for. Snow fell heavily across the capital as crowds gathered near the fortress gates despite the freezing winds. Merchants abandoned market stalls early just to exchange rumors. Servants carried gossip between noble houses faster than royal messengers. Some claimed the prisoner was the king's illegitimate daughter. Others believed she belonged to the lost northern bloodlines destroyed decades earlier. The oldest citizens whispered darker things. They remembered the winter massacre, not openly, never openly, but memory had begun breathing again. Inside the kingdom, and memory was dangerous. High above the city, King Kale stood alone upon the fortress balcony overlooking the snow-covered streets below. He had not slept. Darkness lingered beneath his eyes while cold winds pulled against the heavy black cloak hanging from his shoulders. The kingdom stretched endlessly before him beneath pale skies, beautiful and fragile beneath winter frost. His kingdom, the realm he built through fear, discipline, and sacrifice. A kingdom now trembling because of one girl locked beneath his own fortress. Behind him, the doors to the royal chambers opened carefully. The captain of the guard approached with visible hesitation. "Your Majesty?" Kale did not turn around. What now? The council demands answers. Then let them wait. The nobles are frightened. That finally pulled a bitter smile from the king. They should be. Silence followed. Below the balcony, distant bells rang softly across the capital city. The captain swallowed before continuing. The assassin survived questioning. Kale's expression hardened instantly, and he confessed someone within the royal court paid him to silence the prisoner before rumors spread further. Kale closed his eyes briefly. Of course, fear was beginning to devour the palace from within. The nobles understood what this situation meant. If Lyra truly connected to the northern bloodlines, then everything surrounding Kael's rise to power would come under scrutiny again. Questions would follow. Questions led to truth, and truth destroyed kingdoms faster than war ever could. Names? Kael asked quietly. The captain hesitated. He died before revealing them. The king's jaw tightened. Convenient. Someone powerful inside the fortress was already cleaning loose ends. Kael stepped away from the balcony edge slowly. Double the guards around the prison corridor. The captain looked uneasy. The Hound will not allow it. A long silence followed. Then quietly, almost to himself, Kael whispered, "No, it won't." Deep underground. Lyra sat awake near the bars of her prison cell while torchlight flickered weakly across stone walls. She could still feel the warmth of the Hound's fur against her fingertips from the night before. The memory unsettled her deeply. Because nothing about the beast's behavior made sense anymore, it watched her constantly now. Not with hunger, not with aggression, with concern. The realization frightened her more than hatred ever could. Outside the cell, the Hound rested near. The corridor entrance with dried blood still visible along parts of its dark fur from the attack during the night. Servants no longer attempted to approach closely. Even the guards maintained distance now. Nobody trusted what the creature might do if threatened again. Lyra slowly approached the bars. The beast lifted its head immediately. Those amber eyes found her instantly, softening in a way impossible for something so terrifying. A strange pain tightened inside her chest again. Recognition, always recognition. "You remember me," she whispered softly. The Hound remained silent, but silence itself had begun feeling like an answer. Before she could think further, footsteps echoed through the underground corridor. Several guards appeared carrying lanterns. Behind them came the elderly servant from earlier. Unlike before, fear covered the old woman's face completely. "They're searching the palace," she whispered urgently through the bars. Lyra frowned. "Why?" "The council believes someone inside the fortress knows your identity." The words sent unease twisting through her stomach. "My identity." The servant glanced nervously toward the guards nearby before leaning closer. "People are beginning to remember the Northern Massacre." Pain flashed suddenly behind Lyra's eyes. Another memory burst violently into her mind. Snow, fire consuming rooftops, a silver crest hanging above a doorway, a woman kneeling before her. "Run, Lyra. Run!" The voice echoed so clearly inside her mind that her knees nearly gave out beneath her. The Hound stood instantly. Low concern rumbled deep within its chest as it moved toward the bars. Lyra gripped the cold iron tightly while breathing shakily. "What happened to me?" she whispered. The servant's eyes filled with sorrow. "You survived something nobody else did." Before Lyra could respond, shouting suddenly erupted somewhere above the prison chambers. Boots thundered across stone floors. The guards turned sharply toward the staircase. Then another voice echoed downward. "The king is coming." The underground corridor instantly tightened with tension. Moments later, King Kael descended the stairs alone. No advisors, no soldiers, only exhaustion. The moment the Hound saw him, it rose protectively before the cell again. Not attacking, warning. Kael stopped several feet away. His eyes briefly shifted toward the elderly servant. "You should leave." The woman bowed quickly and hurried away without argument. Soon only the king, the prisoner, and the beast remained together again. The silence between them felt unbearable. Kael looked worse than before. Older, somehow, as though every passing hour drained more strength from him. Lyra studied him carefully through the bars. This man ruled an entire kingdom. Yet lately he looked less like a king and more like someone slowly drowning beneath invisible weight. Finally Kael spoke. "You remember pieces now." 'Twas not a question. Lyra swallowed hard. "Tell me the truth." Pain flickered across his face instantly. "The truth will destroy more than you understand." It already destroyed something. The words struck him harder than she expected. Kale looked away briefly, toward the torchlit corridor. Snowstorm winds howled faintly through distant cracks in the fortress walls above them. Then, quietly, he asked, "What do you remember?" Lyra hesitated. Fragments swirled endlessly through her mind now. "A village," she whispered. "Fire screaming. Someone carrying me through snow." Kale's expression darkened. There were soldiers. The king closed his eyes. And a silver wolf crest. Lyra continued softly, "I keep seeing it." The hound moved closer beside the bars. Kale noticed immediately, his face hollowed further. That crest belonged to House Vaelor. The name struck her like lightning dot. Something inside her chest twisted. Violently, not because she remembered fully, because part of her already knew. Kale stared directly at her now. "Your family." Silence swallowed the corridor completely. Lyra felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "My family." The king nodded once, and suddenly another memory crashed into place. A woman laughing softly beside. Candlelight, silver hair. Gentle hands, the same wolf crest stitched into winter cloaks. Mother Lyra staggered backward as tears burned behind her eyes. "No." Kale's voice lowered. "House Vaelor carried one of the oldest claims to the northern throne." Pieces finally began connecting. The whispers, the fear, the hidden prison. The assassination attempt. Lyra looked at him with growing horror. "You destroyed them." Kale said nothing, but silence answered loudly enough. The hound growled softly, not threatening, grieving Lyra. Pressed trembling fingers against her mouth while memories continued flooding back faster now. Soldiers storming through burning streets. Villagers screaming. A woman shoving a child toward. Hidden woods, don't stop running. Then smoke darkness, cold snow against tiny bare feet. And behind everything, the sound of wolves howling beneath flames. Tears slid down Lyra's face before she noticed. "You killed them." Kale looked like the words physically wounded him. "I ended a threat before civil war consumed the kingdom." "No," Lyra whispered. "You murdered innocent people." The king's jaw tightened painfully. "You think kingdoms survive through mercy? I think monsters survive through fear." The sentence struck deep. Kale looked suddenly exhausted beyond words. For several seconds, he simply stared at the prison floor. Then quietly, he admitted, "I searched for survivors afterward." Lyra froze. "What?" "I was told none remained." His eyes finally lifted toward her again. "When reports reached me years later about a girl hiding under false names near the Southern Territories." His voice weakened slightly. "I hoped the rumors were false." The hound stepped closer beside Lyra, protective, faithful, and Kale watched the creature with visible heartbreak, because now he understood something terrifying. The beast remembered the child he failed to erase. Outside the fortress, rumors continued spreading like wildfire. Crowds grew larger near the castle gates each day, despite freezing weather. Priests spoke cautiously about justice during temple sermons. Merchants exchanged stories of the Northern Massacre openly now for the first time in decades. Fear no longer belonged only to the prisoner. It belonged to the throne itself. Inside the royal council chambers, nobles argued viciously behind closed doors. She cannot remain alive. If the people discover the truth, they already suspect. She threatens the stability of the realm. One elderly lord slammed his fist against the table. "No. Kale threatens the realm." Silence followed instantly, because nobody dared speak that thought aloud before now. The kingdom had begun changing, and once fear cracked. It rarely repaired cleanly. That evening, snowstorms battered the fortress harder than ever. Wind screamed across stone towers while torch flames flickered violently throughout the halls, deep underground. Lyra sat awake beside the bars while exhaustion pulled heavily at her body. The Hound rested. Nearby, closer than usual tonight, as though sensing danger approaching again. And perhaps it did, because somewhere above them, decisions were already being made. Men terrified of losing power rarely surrendered peacefully. Hours passed, the prison corridor grew quieter, then suddenly metal scraped softly against stone. The Hound's eyes snapped open instantly. Its body stiffened. Lyra rose carefully from the prison bed. "What is it?" The beast growled low in its throat. Footsteps approached, not from the main staircase, from deeper inside the abandoned underground tunnels connected to older fortress chambers. Lyra's pulse quickened. Nobody used those tunnels anymore. Torchlight flickered faintly within darkness beyond the corridor. Then shapes emerged. Armed men, 5 of them. Not royal guards. Their armor carried no crest. Mercenaries. The Hound exploded upward with terrifying force. The first attacker barely raised his sword before the beast slammed into him. Bones cracked loudly beneath enormous jaws. Chaos erupted instantly. The remaining men rushed forward. Steel flashed beneath torchlight. Lyra stumbled backward inside the cell while screams thundered through the corridor. The Hound moved like something born for war. Fast, brutal. One mercenary crashed against the wall hard enough to shatter stone torch brackets. Another screamed as claws tore through his armor. Blood sprayed across the corridor floor. The prison echoed with violence. Yet through all the chaos, the beast never moved away from Lyra's cell for more than a second, protecting her. Always protecting her. One attacker finally reached the prison bars and shoved a blade between them. Toward Lyra, the Hound tore his throat out before the strike landed. The man collapsed instantly. Heavy footsteps thundered from the main staircase moments later. Royal guards flooded the underground chambers, carrying shields and torches. The surviving mercenaries fled deeper into darkness. Then suddenly King Kael himself appeared. The sight before him froze the corridor into silence. Bodies, blood, the Hound standing protectively before Lyra's cell while growls echoed through the underground like distant thunder. Kael understood immediately. The nobles had stopped waiting for permission. Someone wanted the girl dead before truth reached the kingdom completely. One wounded mercenary still breathed weakly near the wall. Kael grabbed the man violently by his armor. "Who sent you?" The mercenary coughed blood, then laughed weakly. "Your own throne fears her now," before anyone could stop him. The man bit down hard. Poison, dark blood spilled from his mouth seconds later. Dead Kael released the body slowly. Something inside him finally began breaking apart completely, because now the kingdom itself had turned monstrous, trying to bury the truth he created years ago. Behind the bars, Lyra stared at him through flickering torchlight. "You brought this to my life." Kael looked at her silently, and for the first time since becoming king, he had no defense left, only guilt. The Hound moved beside Lyra again, pressing close to the bars protectively. Kael watched the creature carefully. Then his gaze shifted toward the silver wolf-shaped pendant partially visible beneath Lyra's torn prison clothing. A pendant he remembered seeing once before around another woman's neck. 20 years ago, Lyra's mother, pain hollowed him instantly because the truth had finally become undeniable now. The girl beneath the fortress was not merely a survivor. She was the last living heir of the bloodline he destroyed to seize the throne. And somehow, despite everything the Hound had known from the very beginning, by the 10th day, the kingdom stood on the edge of collapse. Snow still covered the mountains. surrounding the capital, but the beauty of winter no longer comforted anyone. Fear had spread too far now. It lived inside crowded marketplaces and noble halls alike. It echoed through taverns, temples, military barracks, and servant corridors beneath the fortress. Everywhere people spoke the same question in lowered voices. Was the Alpha King truly a murderer? The answer already existed inside most hearts. They simply feared saying it aloud. From the highest tower windows of the royal fortress, Kale watched smoke rise from the city below, where crowds gathered despite freezing winds. The capital had grown restless overnight. Royal banners were torn down in certain districts. Angry arguments erupted in the streets. Guards struggled to maintain order without turning violence against their own people. The kingdom was beginning to fracture. And Kale knew exactly why, because lies could hold a throne together for years. But once truth entered the room, fear stopped obeying behind him. Members of the royal council argued inside the war chamber with growing desperation. She must die before rebellion spreads further. If the people believe House Vaelor still has a surviving heir, they already believe it. A nobleman slammed both hands against the table. Then give them a body to bury and end this madness. Kale remained silent near the window. Another advisor spoke carefully. Your Majesty, if you do nothing, the northern territories may rise against the crown again. That finally pulled Kale's attention away from the city below. Rise against the crown. The phrase twisted bitterly inside him. 20 years earlier, he committed atrocities, claiming he wished to prevent civil war. Now, his choices threatened to create the exact chaos he feared. The cruel irony hollowed him from within. An older council member stepped forward slowly. There is still time to control this, the man whispered. Execute the girl quietly. Publicly blame foreign assassins for spreading false rumors. The people will believe what they are told. Kale stared at him for several long seconds, then quietly asked, and if they do not? Silence followed. Because everyone inside the chamber already understood the truth. The kingdom no longer feared the throne the way it once had. Fear was shifting, and that frightened the nobles more than anything else. Another messenger suddenly rushed into the chamber, looking pale. Your Majesty, Kale turned sharply. What now? Crowds have gathered outside the fortress gates demanding to see the prisoner. The room erupted instantly. This is becoming rebellion. Seal the lower districts. Arrest anyone spreading rumors. But Kale heard almost none of it, because deep inside himself, something had finally begun collapsing. Not his power, not his kingdom. The illusion he built his life upon for years. He convinced himself the massacre had been necessary. Necessary sacrifices, necessary bloodshed, necessary cruelty. Now the dead had returned through the eyes of a frightened girl beneath his prison, and even the beast he trusted most had judged him guilty, far below the royal chambers. Lyra sat awake beside the bars of her prison cell, while distant shouting echoed faintly from above. The fortress felt different today. Tenser, more dangerous. Even the guards outside the underground corridor looked terrified now. The Hound remained close beside her cell, its enormous body partially blocking the entrance as though expecting violence at any moment. And perhaps it should have, because the entire kingdom had begun circling around the truth buried beneath the fortress. Lyra wrapped the thin blanket tighter around herself while staring toward the flickering torches lining the corridor walls. She still struggled to breathe whenever memories returned fully. Her mother's face haunted her. Constantly now, the village, the fire, the screams, and beneath all of it stood the horrifying realization that the man ruling the kingdom above her had ordered everything. Not because her family committed crimes, because they threatened his claim to power. The Hound slowly lifted its head when she moved closer to the bars. Its amber eyes, softened instantly upon seeing her. The sight still felt impossible. "You remember them, don't you?" she whispered softly. The beast remained silent, but silence itself had become meaningful between them. Now, Lyra carefully lowered herself to sit beside the bars while the hound rested, close enough for warmth to reach through the iron gaps. For several moments, neither moved. Then quietly she spoke again. "Were you there that night?" The hound's ears twitched slightly. Another memory suddenly surfaced inside her mind, a massive black shape running through smoke, teeth bared against soldiers, a child crying while hidden beneath wooden floorboards, and amber eyes searching desperately through flames. Lyra's breath caught sharply. "You tried to protect us." Tears burned behind her eyes before she realized they were falling, because suddenly she understood. The hound had not belonged to Kael originally. It belonged to House Vaelor, to her family. And after the massacre, Kael had taken the beast for himself. The realization twisted painfully inside her chest, because somehow, even after years serving the king, the creature still remembered the child it failed to save. Footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Moments later, heavy, familiar. The hound rose instantly. King Kael descended into the underground corridor. Alone again, no guards followed him this time, no royal armor, only exhaustion, the moment his eyes found Lyra. Grief flickered openly across his face before he buried it beneath cold restraint. The hound positioned itself between them immediately. Kael stopped several feet away. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then quietly Lyra asked, "Why did you keep it?" Kael frowned slightly. The hound. Silence settled heavily between them. Finally, the king answered, "After the massacre, I found it injured near the forest outside your village." Lyra felt sick listening to him speak about that night so calmly. "It should have died from its wounds," Kael continued quietly. "But it survived." The hound growled softly. Not aggressive, wounded Kael lowered his gaze briefly. "For years, I believed loyalty could erase memory." Lyra stared at him through the bars, and now a pain darkened his expression. "Now I understand memory never truly dies." The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than lies would have, because lately, the Alpha King no longer sounded like a ruler defending himself. He sounded like a man drowning in regret too heavy to carry above them. Sudden shouting echoed through distant fortress halls. Kael stiffened immediately. Moments later, hurried footsteps approached the underground corridor. A royal guard appeared breathless at the stairwell entrance. "Your Majesty?" The man froze nervously at the sight of the hound. Kael's voice sharpened. "What happened?" "The outer gates have been breached." Silence. The crowd's forced entry into the lower courtyard. Some soldiers are refusing orders. The prison corridors seemed to darken around them. Kael closed his eyes briefly. It had begun. Not rebellion, something worse. The collapse of fear, because once people stopped believing rulers were untouchable, kingdoms changed forever. The guard swallowed nervously. "The council demands immediate action regarding the prisoner." Kael opened his eyes slowly. "What action?" The man hesitated. "They wish to move her to a secure location before dawn." Lyra's stomach tightened instantly. Secure location. Everyone in the corridor understood what those words truly meant. "Execution." The hound growled deeply. Kael looked toward the beast, then toward Lyra, and for the first time since her capture, uncertainty entered his eyes completely, because now he stood before an impossible choice: protect the throne or finally face the truth. The guard shifted uneasily. "Your Majesty." Kael remained silent for several long seconds, then quietly said, "Leave us." The guard hesitated. "But the council leave." The command carried enough force that the man obeyed immediately. Soon silence reclaimed the underground corridor. Once more, only the storm outside and the distant unrest above disturbed the quiet. Lyra stared at Kael carefully. "You know they'll kill me." He did not deny it. "If I let them." The answer startled her. Kael slowly stepped closer toward the bars despite the hound's warning growls. "This kingdom was built on fear long before I took the throne," he whispered. "I only learned how to use it better than others." Lyra shook her head bitterly. "So you murdered children?" Pain crossed his face instantly. "I told myself I was saving thousands. And did you?" Kael could not answer. Because somewhere deep inside himself, he no longer believed it either. The silence between them stretched painfully long. Then suddenly another sound echoed through the corridor. Steel, dozens of steps. Armed men approaching. The hound spun instantly toward the stairwell. With violent snarls, Kael's expression darkened. The royal council had ignored his orders. A squad of heavily armed palace soldiers flooded into the underground corridor moments later, carrying shields and drawn blades. Their captain stepped forward nervously. "By order of the royal council, the prisoner will be transferred immediately." The hound lunged forward with a roar that shook the corridor. Several soldiers stumbled backward in terror. Kael stepped between them instantly. "Stand down." The captain looked pale but determined. "With respect, Your Majesty." "The council believes the prisoner threatens the stability of the realm." The realm was threatened long before her. "Sir, I gave an order." Nobody moved. Tension thickened the underground air like smoke. The soldiers looked, terrified of both the beast and the king. But fear of the collapsing kingdom pushed them forward anyway. The captain tightened his grip on the sword. "We cannot leave her here." The hound bared enormous teeth. Low growls vibrated violently through the corridor walls. Then Kael slowly removed the royal seal hanging from around his neck. The entire corridor fell silent instantly. The silver emblem represented absolute authority. The throne itself, and now the Alpha. King held it in his hand like something unbearably heavy. His voice emerged quiet. "When I was young, I believed strength meant being feared." No one spoke. No one breathed. Kael looked toward Lyra through the bars. "But fear is a hungry thing," he whispered. "It devours everything eventually." The soldiers stared in confusion. The hound stopped growling. Even Lyra felt frozen by the grief inside his voice. Kael lowered his gaze toward the royal seal. "For 20 years, I buried innocent people beneath silence because I believed truth would destroy this kingdom." Then, slowly, he looked back up, but lies destroyed it instead. The captain stepped forward uncertainly. "Your Majesty?" Kael's eyes hardened with finality. "Open the cell." Shock rippled across every face in the corridor. The soldiers exchanged nervous glances. No one moved. Then the hound growled again, and suddenly the men seemed far less willing to refuse. With trembling hands, one guard approached the prison door. Keys rattled violently against iron locks. Lyra's heart pounded painfully inside her chest. This could not be real. After days trapped beneath stone and fear, freedom suddenly stood inches away. The final lock clicked open. The prison door slowly creaked inward. For several seconds, Lyra could not move. The open doorway looked unreal. Somehow, like a dream destined to disappear. Then the hound stepped beside her, calmly, waiting, protecting. Not a cage anymore. A path. Lyra slowly crossed the threshold, free, the moment she stepped into the corridor. The hound positioned itself at her side immediately. Kael watched the sight with quiet devastation, because in that single moment, he understood something with brutal clarity. The creature he trusted more than any human being had never truly belonged to him. Its loyalty had only been borrowed from the dead, and now it had finally returned home. Morning arrived beneath the sky. Buried in snow, the storm that had battered the kingdom for days finally weakened, leaving the capital wrapped in cold silence. White frost covered rooftops and fortress walls alike. But beneath that stillness, the realm itself had changed forever. Nothing inside the kingdom felt stable anymore. Not the throne, not the nobles, not even the people. Because truth had entered the royal fortress at last. And truth left damage behind. Crowds filled the lower streets before sunrise, despite freezing winds. Thousands gathered outside the castle gates, waiting for answers while soldiers struggled to maintain order without provoking violence. Some citizens shouted for justice. Others begged the gods to protect the kingdom from civil war. And throughout the restless crowds, one image spread faster than every rumor combined. The Alpha King's Hound standing beside the surviving heir of House Vaelor, the symbol of royal fear, had chosen the girl meant to disappear. That alone shattered something inside the kingdom forever. High above the city, a great throne chamber stood silent beneath towering stone arches. Nobles lined both sides of the hall wearing dark winter robes trimmed with silver and black. Royal guards stood motionless near the walls, though uncertainty lingered visibly across many faces now. At the far end of the chamber stood the throne itself, empty. For the first time in decades, whispers spread quietly through the court as massive wooden doors slowly opened. King Kael entered alone. No royal armor covered him today. No ceremonial crown rested upon his head. He wore only a simple black coat beneath the heavy torchlight, and somehow that frightened the court more than armor ever had. Because the Alpha King looked tired, not weak, not defeated, simply exhausted in a way power could no longer hide. Behind him came Lyra. The moment she entered the chamber, a silence swallowed the hall completely. The Hound walked beside her, massive, silent, watchful. Several nobles instinctively stepped backward at the sight of it, yet the beast ignored everyone except the girl beside it. Lyra felt thousands of eyes settle upon her at once. Hatred, curiosity, fear, pity. The emotional weight of it nearly crushed her chest. Only days earlier, she had been alone beneath a prison fortress, forgotten by the world. Now an entire kingdom watched her like the answer to a question nobody wanted spoken aloud. Kael walked toward the throne platform slowly, but instead of sitting, he stopped before it. For several long moments, he simply stared at the black throne towering above the chamber floor, the seat he fought to protect for 20 years, the throne built upon blood and silence. Then finally, he turned toward the court. His voice echoed quietly through the chamber. When I claimed this throne, I believed fear could save kingdoms. Nobody moved. Kael's gaze drifted briefly toward Lyra. I told myself every terrible thing I did was necessary. Pain tightened his expression. The Northern Massacre. A ripple of shock moved through the court despite everyone already knowing. Kael did not stop. I ordered it. The words struck the throne chamber like thunder. Some nobles lowered their heads instantly. Others stared in disbelief despite the rumors. Kael continued speaking with the calmness of a man who no longer wished to hide from his own sins. I ordered innocent families burned alongside soldiers because I feared what their bloodline represented. Lyra felt tears burn behind her eyes again, not because hearing the truth healed anything, because part of her spent years believing nobody would ever admit what happened, yet now the man responsible stood before the entire kingdom, confessing it openly. Kael looked toward the nobles lining the chamber. I buried survivors. Silence deepened. I spread lies. Voice weakened slightly, and I convinced myself peace, built through terror, was still peace. The throne chamber remained frozen beneath the weight of his confession. Outside, Distant bells rang softly across the capital city. Not celebratory. Morning bells. Kael slowly removed the royal seal from his coat and placed it upon the empty throne. The sound echoed sharply through the hall. Then he stepped backward. I no longer deserve to rule. Panic spread immediately through parts of the court. Several nobles protested at once. The kingdom will fracture. You cannot abandon the throne now. The northern territories will revolt. Kael looked at them with quiet exhaustion. The kingdom began fracturing the night I chose fear over mercy. Nobody answered because deep down, everyone understood he spoke the truth. For years, the realm survived through silence. Now silence was dead, and kingdoms often bled when truth finally arrived. Lyra stood near the chamber entrance with trembling hands while emotions twisted violently inside her chest. Hatred still lived inside her. Grief, too. Nothing would return the people she lost. Nothing would erase the fire or screams still haunting her. Memory, yet standing there now, watching the most feared ruler in the kingdom surrender power willingly. She no longer saw only a monster. She saw a broken man destroyed by the weight of his own choices. And somehow that hurt. Differently, the Hound pressed gently against her. Sigh. Warm. Steady. Present. Lyra lowered her hand carefully. Against its dark fur, the beast closed its eyes briefly beneath her touch. A strange silence passed between them, not the silence of fear, the silence of understanding, because the creature beside her had lost something. That night, too, a family, a home, years stolen by violence it never chose. And still, it remained capable of loyalty without cruelty. That realization changed something. Inside her, a noble woman suddenly stepped forward from the court. What happens now? She whispered, Shakily. The question echoed through the chamber. What happened now? No one knew. Not the nobles, not the soldiers, not even Kael. The kingdom stood wounded between past and future, uncertain which direction would destroy it least. Kael looked toward Lyra then, for the first time since her capture. There was no command. In his eyes, no control, only regret. You survived what should never have happened, he said quietly. Lyra met his gaze. Steadily, yes. Pain flickered across his face. If the kingdom has any chance of becoming better than the one I created, it begins with truth. The chamber remained silent, then slowly, unexpectedly, Lyra stepped forward, not toward the throne, toward the center of the hall. The Hound moved beside her immediately. I followed them. She looked around the chamber filled with frightened nobles and uncertain guards, people who spent years living beneath fear just as she had. Then quietly she spoke. I did not survive for revenge. The words surprised even herself, because once revenge felt like the only thing keeping her alive. But somewhere during those endless nights underground, something changed. Hatred alone no longer felt enough. My family is gone, she continued softly. Nothing will bring them back. Snow blew faintly against the high fortress windows behind her. But if this kingdom keeps building itself upon fear, her eyes shifted briefly toward the throne. Then more graves will follow. No one interrupted, no one argued, because grief spoke louder than politics ever could. Outside the fortress, bells continued ringing across the capital while news of Kael's confession spread. Through the streets, some cried openly, others demanded punishment. Some simply stood in stunned silence beneath falling snow. The Alpha King had confessed the impossible. had become real by nightfall. Kale surrendered royal authority to the council until the kingdom decided its future. Guards no longer followed him through the fortress halls. Afterward, he walked alone now, like a ghost haunting the ruins of his own legacy, far below the castle. Servants extinguished the torches inside the underground prison one final time. Darkness swallowed the corridor, where the Hound had waited for 6 endless days beside Lyra's cell. The cage stood empty at the fortress gates. Lyra paused beneath the cold night sky while snow drifted softly around her. Freedom felt unfamiliar, almost frightening, because freedom meant choosing who she wished to become next. The Hound stepped beside her, quietly, not as a weapon, not as a monster, as family. Lyra looked down at the beast once, feared by an entire kingdom. Then, slowly, she lifted her eyes toward the snowy roads stretching beyond the capital. The future remained uncertain. The kingdom remained wounded, but for the first time in years, the path ahead belonged to her, and together, beneath the falling snow, the girl they tried to erase forever walked away from the fortress while the Alpha King's Hound followed faithfully beside her, not guarding a prison anymore, protecting hope.